Alrighty folks, good morning, good afternoon. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Sposn Gorka R. This is a brown ripstop version that I believe to have been manufactured sometime around 2006. Mid-2000s time period for this guy. We don't know exactly, but I'm sure I'll figure it out after the video airs. So the goal of this video is to take an in-depth look at the unique feature set of a Gorka R as opposed to a more standard Gorka like a Gorka E. And interestingly, to me, other people's videos that I see made on this uniform, they have a pretty different feature set going on theirs. Whether or not those are different models that were available in Sposn's catalog at the same time, or if they're different year variations, I'm not really sure. But that's the goal of today's video, just to take a look at it and see how it differs to something like a Gorka E. I hope you guys appreciated that slow nose reveal. We are inside today as opposed to outside because I'm a bit snowed in right now. Cut to a little clip of that. But as well as looking at the feature set, we are going to take a brief moment to talk about what the purpose of a Gorka uniform is. Why is it made of the material that it's made out of? Why is it cut the way that it's cut? So I see a lot of people getting a Gorka and then being disappointed with it because they bought the wrong uniform for their needs. Myself, I find them to be very versatile. I wear them almost year round and they serve me well. But some people go in expecting one thing, they get a totally different thing, and it just doesn't work for them. So towards the end, we'll take a brief moment to talk about why this exists. Not a crazy in-depth history, but just some practical application information so that you're not overheating or being disappointed with your expensive uniform purchase. So let's begin. We are going to talk about the pants as well as the jacket. We are going to start from the hood and work our way down to the waistline, and then we will transition to the trousers. Now there's a few differences on the hood from a standard Gorka, but the one that stuck out to me most immediately is the lack of a little cap/sun flap here. As you can see on the Gorka E, we have this cut here that is to provide some protection from the sun and elements a little bit. It does its job well. I found it to be a nice addition, but some people may find that it gets in the way, especially if you're trying to wear this under a helmet or something of that nature. So this does not have that cap feature, and it's been completely removed. Furthermore, on the back of the Gorka E hood, if you can see this, we do have adjustment to scrunch the hood, but there's no channel for this to go. It just kind of hangs out here once you've pulled it out. On the Gorka R here, you can see that there is a nice, very well stitched, sewn in channel to keep your excess cord from flapping around or getting caught in anything. We, of course, flipping around, have that same feature out here on the front for the around the face tightening instead of the side pull, which we just saw on the back. I find that these come out of these little tubes. I really wish they worked well, but it's almost not even worth trying to get them in there because they come out. And they can get caught on things. For example, if you have an underfolder stock or similar style weapon stock, that can get caught on these during certain weapon manipulations, which I find kind of unfortunate. Holy moly, it's snowing out there. Alrighty, moving on to the next thing, we are going to take a look at the buttons. Now, on the surface, they seem pretty similar to something like this Gorka E. However, they're pretty different. So it starts the same at the top here with these sewn down Canadian style buttons. But then when we get a little bit lower, you'll see that the Gorka E features a single storm flap. We have our buttons on this side, a little cover fabric for the inside here. They button in, and then you've got this extra layer on the outside. Pretty good. However, on the Gorka R, you're going to notice the buttons are on the other side. They're also not the large style buttons like the Gorka E, which I would say is a little bit of a downgrade because these big buttons on the Gorka E are so easy to quickly use. But if we look here, we can see that we have the same style Canadian buttons where they're sewn down, but much smaller, of course. They button through once on this side, then they button through again on this side, creating a very tight seal against the wind and the elements, which I never had a problem with the Gorka E, but of course I've never put this through rigorous mountain conditions. However, I have found that on cold mornings, this Gorka R does keep the heat in very well. But it does take a second to button it up, though I wouldn't really consider that to be much of an issue myself. Instead of fixed elastics like we have on the Gorka E, on the Gorka R, take a shot every time I say Gorka, you'll die of alcohol poisoning before the video's over. We have a adjustable waistband that uses a cinch system here with these little guys that I don't remember the name of. So that's a more customizable fit you're getting out of the box. We also have two of these big Sposn inside pockets. We can see the stamp here on this side. But I think that's kind of nice to have two inside pockets. Some people might say that's a little overkill, but it is what it is. They both still have the hanging hook. You can see that pocket here on the Gorka E, and it is notably absent from the other side. From there, we're going to get into some of the really neat stuff. Now, if I don't compare it to something on the Gorka E, just assume that that feature is not present on that jacket. Coming under here, we have almost what I would consider to be hidden pockets. Underneath the reinforcement fabric, you'll see that we have little buttons. We can pull this open, and it is a huge internal pocket here. Well, I guess not huge, but I can fit my whole hand in there. Like 2 beer cans could get stuffed in there, yep. And you wouldn't really know that that pocket was even there. Kind of nice. You can access it with certain chest rigs and things, but it gives you a lot of options. However, this is creating a fair few more layers of fabric going on here, and that's going to be one of the many things that contributes to this being not as lightweight of a uniform as something like a Gorka 3 or this Gorka E that I've been showing. Moving from there, we do have these buttoned pockets on the waist, and they are pretty standard hand pockets. They're quite large, and you'll note that is one of the other differences that we have going on is the angle of the pockets. On the Gorka E, they're slanted, but they're still primarily down, right? And same style where it's a sewn piece of fabric, but these retain the little buttons where these have the big buttons. You've still got that little flap here. It's a little shorter on this one. But yeah, this comes in from the side. This is really more down from the top. And you can see here, there's that fixed elastic waist cinch. Now, some of the really cool shit is going to be on the inside. We'll touch the sleeves in a second here. I've kind of been going out of order, but you know what? It is what it is. Please note that that reinforcement fabric pocket is mirrored on both sides. You have that on both sides. We touched on these already, so moving on to the interior, this is where things really start to get funky. Like we discussed, we have this double inside pocket as opposed to just the single. I know some other Gorka models from Sposn do have that feature as well. But most interestingly, we have this elastic cinch on the bottom, extra piece of the ripstop fabric here. Now this can button in on itself, and this closes tightly around your body, creating a second layer to keep wind from coming up from the outside of the garment, as well as if you're falling into snow or something of that nature, it will keep snow from shooting all the way up your back. Now, underneath that, we have something even more interesting to me. This is a feature you'll see on a lot of smocks, but we have these large mesh pockets sewn to kind of where your butt's going to be, or just above it, depending on the fit of your jacket, probably on your butt because of the way Gorkas are meant to fit. And this is interesting. I don't know what specifically this is for. I call it a game bag because it reminds me of those hunting vests where you stick the rabbits and the turkeys and whatnot in your sort of butt pouch like this. But what I think it's been most useful for is when you're dropping a layer of clothing, or you have socks that you've changed expediently and you want the old socks to dry out while you're wearing the new ones, assuming it's just like sweat and they're not fucking soaked, right? You can stick layers that you've dropped, warming layers you've dropped in here. You can stick those socks or other random bullshit. There's really no specific use for this pouch that I'm aware of, but I've been using it for warming layers and socks. That's why I smell so good. So from there, at the bottom, we have a standard double pull cinch cinch for the bottom of your jacket to keep the wind and whatnot staying out. On the Gorka E, it is much the same. However, instead of having two, you are just going to have one on one side of the jacket. And it also includes these little strings to try to tie the excess down, which I do, and it never stays. And they did not include that on this model, and I do not see any specific way to take care of those, but I've never really had it be a large issue. You can always kind of tie it in on itself. Oh wait, let me eat my words. And I have used it apparently. We have little loops. We have little loops that you use to try and keep these strings a little bit more organized. So they did include something for that. And I would say it's a little bit of an upgrade from those strings that come untied. All right, now we are gonna move on to the sleeves. And I do apologize for how kind of all over the place this has been, but I'm not so good at this whole thing. So you're kind of getting what you're getting. My bad, gang. All right, so standard sort of Gorka cut with reinforcement fabric. We once again have those little buttons on the pockets, otherwise standard Gorka arm pocket. It doesn't have the Velcro like you'd see on some older models, which I don't know if that's a variation or indicates this is a newer Gorka than those ones that would have the Velcro, but just something to note. And again, this is one of those things that I really wish had those big Canadian buttons on it, but what can you do? Anyway, from there, this is where things actually get different on the sleeves when we come down to the cuff area. Now, you'll make note of this, that this is something that carries through most of the cinching that uses elastics on this jacket. It's going to be thicker here than on the Gorka E sleeve. Might not come across on camera, but this is a thinner piece of elastic, whereas this is a much wider one. This also is a little bit more bungee and taut, but that could just be due to the age of the garments. The Gorka E is just from like 2016. I bought it new on Gray Shop. I know. Hang me, crucify me. I bought something from Gray Shop. Anyway, it is a genuine genuine Sposn Gorka, not like a Mordor tack one. Yeah, that's what they're called. Now, the Velcro right on the wrist is much, much wider than that of the Gorka E, which I think is kind of nice. It's also a little bit looser, and you'll notice that the sleeves are cut a little longer. At least that's what I've observed, and that is because it has a thumb loop. When you put this garment on, you just swing through here, you can actually stick your thumb through this loop, and it keeps them over the front of your hand like that. I think that is pretty heckin' cool, and I do use that feature. All right, that about covers the differences on the jacket. And now, as you can see, we've got a quick overview. 2 additional pockets here, an additional inside pocket, the whole additional wind/snow flap down here, the additional big mesh pocket at the bottom, an addition of another cinch at the waist. Of course, all the differences on the hood with the lack of the visor peak and the little tunnels for your extra adjusters, and the slight differences on the style of the pockets and cuffs. So a fair bit more robust than the Gorka E. All right, now we are going to find ourselves going over the trousers. So we're going to start from the waist and go down, and then I'll inevitably forget that, and we'll just talk about things as they come to me. So we're going to start with the pockets. See, already abandoned the order. Now, on the Gorka R, these pockets have a covered flap, much like the jacket, with a button to keep your stuff secured inside the pocket right here. It's that pocket. On the Gorka E, you're going to see that it has a nicely sewn opening for said pocket, but but there's no closure flap. It is just held in by the same way something in your sort of jeans would be, though this is a nice opening, I got to say. Now you're going to see on the closure of the Gorka E, we have just buttons and a wind flap here. Quite nice, quite functional. However, on the Gorka R, we're going to have our top button, but then it's going to have one of these sort of metal slidey guys that I don't know the name of. And honestly, sometimes when you really got to pee, getting this off could be slightly annoying just because you're used to standard button pants or Velcro like Cry styles. But once you get the hang of it, it's pretty quick and easy, honestly, and I don't mind it. Otherwise, same standard storm flap and buttons. Now, you will notice that the Gorka R pants have these little guys for their cinches on the waistband. However, the Gorka E, you just tie it like a knot. I don't find one to be superior to the other. I usually end up tying these in a knot anyway and not really using these all too much outside of getting the general length that I want. Now, they both do feature suspender loops, same kind and amount, so no change there. The belt loops are a little bit thicker on the Gorka R, but I would say it's a menial difference. Now, I have seen some Gorka Rs where they no longer have the bungee on the waist and they rely solely on the cinch. Thankfully, mine does include the bungee all the way around the waist, just like the Gorka E, which I think is a very nice feature of Gorka uniforms. So, from there, we are going to touch on the pockets. Now, on the back of the Gorka E, you will see there are none. There are no rear pockets, and this is kind of nice, sliding around on your ass and everything all day. Nothing gets caught up, and I've worn these to hell and back, and, well, nothing serious, airsoft hell and back, and just hiking. But the LARP is hell, LARP is heck. Anyway, they withstood a seriously long time. I did eventually need to get this camouflage re-sewn, but no pockets. Right, moving on. On the back of the Gorka R, you are going to see that we have rear pockets. Now, they are able to sort of plume out a little bit with the stitching here, almost like a box. I'm sure there's proper names for that. And then you'll see that there is, on the flap, an additional piece of fabric here for your button to go into, so it's not sticking out the back, getting caught on things. And then it is the same style buttons we've been seeing over the rest of the garment. Now, I do like having back pockets because one pocket on my uniform is always going to be the trash pocket, where I'm stuffing tissues and random bullshit, whatever trash I generate just gets stuffed into that black hole of a pocket. So having a rear pocket to do that with is quite nice, because that's usually where I do that. All right, moving on from there, we are going to take a look at the cargo pockets. And this is another major difference between these two uniforms. I will sort of plume out the pants in a minute here so you can actually get a good look at the guys front and back. Oh, come on now. All right, so we'll start with the Gorka R then. This has sort of BDU style cuts in the pocket to allow it to expand more and really fit a decently larger amount of stuff into the cargo pocket as opposed to the Gorka E. Now, I've been able to shove a hell of a lot of stuff in the Gorka E's cargo pockets, but this does definitely give you some added expansion. Now, this is going to have two buttons and BBs sewn down on one side, very much just like a BDU pocket. Same style with the cover and the buttons and everything. Very much just is almost a one-for-one BDU pocket, except for the fact that the buttons are the little piece of fabric and everything like we've been seeing on the rest of the garment. Now, on the Gorka E, we can get this pocket out here. I do kind of like this because of how quick and easy to access it is. We just have one very large button sewn down the same way, and there is no pleats. It is just a piece of fabric sewn onto the garment. Both have their pros and cons, but this one is certainly a little more expensive to produce and bougie. Moving from there, this will be hard to illustrate, but on the knees, get out of there, there is something really interesting going on. So this is going to be the knee of the garment. There's almost like a third layer of fabric in the Gorka R. I don't really know how to describe it, but there's some very, very light but extra padding for your knee as opposed to the Gorka E, which is just a very simple, reinforcement camouflage fabric over the standard tent fabric. So that's really interesting. I do find it to be rather comfortable. We also have these bits for mobility. I do not remember what those are called, just like we do on the Gorka E. The Gorka R also has that reinforcement fabric kind of stop here beneath the knee, whereas in the Gorka E, it continues down the pant all the way to the bottom of the trousers. Now, looking at the bottom, it is kind of the standard affair with your tick trap that comes up and the strings and the bungee, non-adjustable, just like on the Gorka E, and nothing big to write home about changes there. Both similar thickness in the elastic, both featuring the bit of side reinforcement fabric where your legs are going to rub together. And yeah, so nothing major has changed there. And then that sort of brings us to the end of the trousers, and by extension, the end of the video. So I'm sure there's maybe something I have forgotten. Oh, yeah, example. The elastic on the back of the knees is a little bit thicker, just like we've seen on the rest of the garment, than it is on the Gorka E. Also, smaller, more angular sewn-on butt fabric as opposed to the Gorka E, which has the very standard cut for the rear trouser reinforcement fabric. Oh my goodness. This actually doesn't have rear elastics for the knee. I just made that up. Well, there's another difference. My bad, gang. But all right, so sure there's some mistakes in there, but quick and dirty because I'm snowed in. Just wanted to record something inside. Normally I like to do it outside, but coming to the end of the video, let's talk about what the heck is the point of a Gorka uniform. All right, so coming to the end of our video, let's briefly touch on why do I find that people often are disappointed by their Gorka uniform. And why has that led to changes in things like the Commando Store Gorka? Now, Gorkas are made out of a thick tent canvas. That's the base of the uniform. Whatever reinforcement fabric you get is up to the manufacturer and the type of Gorka you're getting. For example, this is a thick ripstop, whereas this is a lightweight camouflage material. But the base fabric remains extremely similar. This one's just more worn out than this one. It's a tent fabric, and the idea behind that is to keep out wind. Gorkas were born out of civilian mountain hunting suits in the late sort of Soviet period. And the idea is that when you're getting up to mountain peaks and everything, this is going to keep the wind out as best it could with the technology at the time. And these are not meant to be waterproof. I don't know why there's this sort of myth and thing that goes around that people are like, oh, my Gorka wetted out and everything. I know this isn't everybody, but there certainly are people that are disappointed with the performance of their Gorka when it comes to the elements. Well, this is a canvas suit. It doesn't usually come waxed. Some of them come waxed, but it doesn't come waxed so that if you want a more breathable uniform that's just going to protect you against the wind but not suffocate you, you have that option. But it has no inherent waterproof capabilities, as this is 100% cotton, exclusive of maybe the trimming and the reinforcement fabric, right? If you want this to be waterproof, you have to wax it. That's really easy, quick, and cheap to do. Once you wax it, the uniform will be heavier, but it will be waterproof for the duration that that waxing lasts, okay? So that's touching on the waterproof thing. Now, these are meant to be heavy uniforms to keep the wind out. They're also meant to be incredibly baggy because you are meant to layer this over all of your other warming layers in uniform. That's why they're cut the way that they are. I think it lends itself to good temperature regulation as well, but that's me. Some people really don't like this baggy fit. They want something that's more modern, a more modern cut that can be worn as sort of a base uniform layer. And that's why we see a slimmer cut on things like the Commando Store Gorka, and it's also why we see such a lighter fabric being used on that, and the same material for the reinforcement as well as the base in a lot of cases. Because the base of this, like I said, it's a very heavy tent fabric. It's meant for keeping the wind out. It's meant to be able to be waxed, and it's meant to be extremely abrasion resistant. This is not made with being lightweight or keeping you cool in mind. This is a mountain suit, and it's going to behave as such. So if you get one of these expecting it to breathe and be a good uniform for warm weather, you're going in with the wrong intentions. Now, thankfully, Commando Store and other companies have reproduced this in lighter weight fabrics, but to me, that is just a uniform that's in the shape of a Gorka. It's not retaining the qualities of a Gorka, for example, being able to be waxed, keeping the wind out so well, and having such a roomy cut that you can layer anything and everything underneath it to really keep yourself at your desired temperature in various climates and elevations. So a Gorka is a mountain suit. It's meant to keep the wind out. If you want it to keep you waterproof, you gotta wax it, and it's baggy on purpose. So if those are things that turn you away from a uniform, do not get a Gorka. If you don't mind it being heavier, that's something you prefer, if you live in areas where this is more useful, such as I do, this is awesome. Whereas something like a Commando Store Gorka, not saying it's bad or less good or anything, but it's a totally different uniform striving for a totally different goal than a basic original Gorka suit. And as we've seen, there's a decent variation in how warm both of these would keep you. That one having way less features and layers on it inherently is going to be a little lighter weight and nicer for the warmer weather than this guy with these extra layers inside of it, which is going to be even better at keeping the wind out, but inherently keeping you a bit warmer, whether that's a pro or a con, up to you depending where you are. So that's a brief overview of the Gorka R and a comparison to a more standard Gorka E. I'm sure there's some mistakes in there. I'm sure there's some things I missed, but thank you so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day. I might upload again in 2 years or so. And when my cameraman comes back from the other side of the country, maybe the videos will ramp up a little bit then too. All right, see you guys in the next one. God knows when that'll be.